Welcome everyone, Christine here with America's Armored Fist in Broken Arrow, making a tank deck, or really an armored vehicle deck. It would probably be more appropriate, because there will be tanks, of course, very powerful tanks, though not necessarily that many of them, compared to how many IFVs, Bradleys, we will have. So, in terms of army builder, what do you want to go for in terms of your battle group specializations? Well, obviously, you would want to have the armor brigade. That makes perfect sense given the situation. But what else would you want? Well, you could go with the Marines if you want to have some helicopters, or you could go with the Striker Brigade. Pros and cons on that subject, but personally, while there are benefits to the Marines that one should ignore, I vastly prefer going for the Striker Cavalry Regiment if I'm going to go with America's Armored Fist. Keep in mind, this is a dedicated deck for armored power, so you're going to be lacking in certain areas. Specifically, helicopters are very useful to get supplies across the map, especially if you lower their altitude. So if you're dealing with enemy air defenses on a map or enemy planes, just lower the altitude, toggle the altitude, and you can probably get them to the front line faster. Though, generally speaking, it's a good idea to keep the supplies running, like just small caches of supplies here and there, or you could make a huge supply waypoint if you want to make that risk, and use trucks to move from that supply waypoint. But anyway, these are the two specializations you want to use over here. And we'll start directly with vehicles. Now, you do have a bunch of tanks over here. One of the things you could do is go for a bunch of regular M1A2 Abrams or A2 SCP Abrams with Tusk armor. But the problem with these vehicles is they don't have active protection, which does matter. You only have 2 tanks available over here that do have active protection, and I would say that these 2 tanks are the only ones really worth using. And this is the Armored Brigade deck. Now, to highlight the value of active protection systems, I'm just going to show this in a scenario, the refinery mission available for the US. So what we got over there are 2 M1A2 SCPs. They don't have active protection. They're going to go towards the objective right there. And let's see if they even reach said objective right there. So we can see that we're dealing with anti-tank troops, and both of them are pretty much done right there. So now, as a follow-up, we send these M1A2 with trophies. Now, we're still getting bombarded by artillery. Keep that aspect in mind right there. But the difference is that even though we're getting hit by artillery, the active protection is keeping us alive for a decent amount of time against the enemy rocket troops. And that's not all, really. Because if we call in a bunch of Bradleys right here against enemy positions, we can see that, we're getting spawn camped right there. But again, active protection is playing its role, is keeping us alive against vast numbers of troops. Obviously, we're not necessarily going to win this because there's multiple ways of taking damage. But if we didn't have active protection in this kind of situation, we would not make it. And we're able to even take this objective, if you will, in this situation in large part because of that active protection. So that's why active protection is so important on vehicles to have. Otherwise, you're just going to end up throwing a bunch of tanks that are just going to be obliterated in just a couple of seconds against anyone who has a rocket system, and a lot of troops do have a lot of rockets. So if we call in a regular Abrams over here, again, just that kind of situation right there, we still have the V3 alive right there, but if we call in a regular Abrams, let's see how long it lasts, considering how far the Bradleys made it. Now, granted, there were quite a few of them, and I did lose a number of them, but let's see what actually ends up happening over here. 2 rockets, 3 rockets, and then, I end up dying very, very quickly. That's the difference between having active protection and not having it. So with that showcased, what I would recommend you do if you're going to go for armor power as the United States is you go with SEP V Freeze, Tusk to Armor, Trophy APS, or just the Trophy Active Protection. The Tusk Armor, what it does is it gives you side protection. So Tusk 2, you can see the value over there compared to just the regular ones. It's 250 by default. You can really increase it over here by quite a substantial amount if you're using that benefit right there. Also, Trophy is kind of crazy when you're looking like, you know, Tusk to Armor, Trophy APS, like all that lovely protection. To be fair, you know, it's that's mostly just the Tusk to Armor. So, yeah, Trophy is not necessarily going to be as crazy as just the up armor protection over there on the top. Regardless, so that's one option. So you go for these V3s, and then you have the V2s, which also have active protection and Tusk 2. It's up to you if you want Tusk 2 armor. Can be beneficial, can give you that extra protection to be sure, but there are also plenty of times where we might just say it's kind of redundant, though you will probably want to have all of these tanks or a good portion of them, so saving a couple of points on them is not necessarily going to be that important. I mean, it can be 30 points, but if you're bringing in these kind of big boys, you probably want them to be as good as possible. Now, beyond that, you do have a bunch of different choices, like you can go with that M10 Booker, which actually has the Iron Fist protection. So if you want a lighter tank, you could go with that. You can go with the Battleship, you can go with having a TOW 2, or the Striker MGS. But personally, I would prefer going with the Striker ATGM. So you can get TOW 2Bs, which have overfly attack, and also have a trophy system on these things as well. Now, keep in mind, we can go up to 10% on the limit here. So we can actually get 4 Striker ATGMs with trophy system. So what you're going to have here in terms of capability, so you're not really going to have the greatest infantry capability. You're not going to have a gun, but you are going to have the TOW 2Bs. These can be useful in certain scenarios where it's like if the enemy just decide, okay, I'm going to go bring a bunch of cheap armor vehicles to transform my opponent with numbers. Don't think that's really going to work. But you can use these things for a much cheaper option. Like, I swear, the Striker is the all-purpose vehicle of the U.S. Army in a lot of different ways. Alternatively, if that's not to your liking, you can always go for some M1A2 SCPs, but keep in mind, even with this large number of points dedicated to a tank deck, you're not necessarily going to have a huge amount of vehicles available. So numbers, they can be useful sometimes, but not necessarily here. Where numbers are going to matter is with regards to combat vehicle. This is where the Armor Brigade really shines, because you have a lot, and I do mean a lot, of different Bradleys available over here for you. So you get engineers or combat engineers with the Striker Brigade. But let's ignore that and instead go for the Bradley. Now, with the Bradley, the armor itself is not necessarily too important, though if we look at the value proposition, we can see that it is increasing the defensive capability by quite a bit. So these Bradleys, while they are lacking in pure damage with their gun, they do have those TOW 2s, they do have Iron Fist active protection right there. Cooldown, etc., and they're relatively cheap, and you can call them in on their own. You don't just need to bring them with infantry. You do need to selective free infantry in a deck. So what we'd want over here is to get the maximum possible number of Bradleys with as much active protection as we possibly can. So ideally, we'd call in all 3 of these to the maximum limit if you want to. You could decide to drop the armor package over here if you're really looking for it. But yeah, you're not going to be able to afford everything. At least not with M2A4 rallies. But even if you're dropping this, you're still not necessarily going to have the most amount of points. And I would recommend getting some of these combat engineers because they can be really, really good in terms of clearing out buildings. So something has to give on this subject. What I would say, you just want to drop one Bradley over here with the mechanized rifleman AA. So there's no no squad customization right here. So it's like the weapons these guys have are set by default. But just having some of that infantry is, from my perspective, worth it. Even if it is the cost of Bradley. Though, keep in mind, you're still going to have plenty of freaking Bradleys available here. Recon-wise, what you want is 2 MK RQ-7 Shadows, 2 Predators. The weapons you pick on these, I'd probably go with Stingers just to have an anti-helicopter capability and just get a large amount of them because you're not really going to have points for other things. And you can get the Striker right here for a Scouts with a Bushmaster and a Javelin. So Bradley is better, sure, but you can get a lot of these babies right here. So you can get 4 Scouts, and then you also have a Bradley right here, which again has active protection, has the tow. So that's the option I would personally prefer right there, because this one right here does give you Iron Fist, does give you that engine, does have the tow. So you would just get as many of these as you can. Maybe you drop a Scout, maybe not. Maybe you drop a Predator right there. Just make sure you have some drones right here. Ideally, right, it's like we'd get 4 of these, but you know, you would have to probably drop something somewhere. Maybe I'd drop a Scout, though not really the most ideal scenario right there, but yeah, you could drop a Scout unit and instead just go with 4 Javelin missiles, because that's one of the problems, by the way, this deck has. It's like the primary way you gain Javelin missiles on infantry is through your cavalry scouts. That's the most reliable means of getting that. And we can't afford another Shadow. So 3 Scouts, 4 Cavalry Scouts, 3 Striker RV with Trophy, but we've maximized the number of Bradleys we have here. Somewhat, because you also have the M7A2 Fist, right? So you can get these. So one of the things you could do is with the Cavalry Scouts, you can cancel this this right here, and instead go for as many of these babies as you can. So you get 3 of these instead. You do, but they don't have, so while they're capable of tanking, they obviously don't have Javelin, so that would not be great. You do want that Javelin capability. So yes, going for the Striker RV is your best bet in that situation. So you have 7 vehicles in Recon alone that have anti-tank capability, guns, and active protection. You have 11 more in your infantry. That's 18 vehicles. Then you add in the tanks. This is why I call it Armored Fist, because it is really America's Iron Fist. But the nice thing about Striker Cav Regiment, and keep in mind, this is why Striker Regiment is so useful. You lose out on the helicopters, but you gain a lot over here. And this is where things are going to be ridiculous. We have almost 3,000 points in support, so that means artillery. What I would get is pretty much everything over here, or different types. So I would get 2 Centurion C-Rams. Armor on this doesn't matter. If anything's taking a shot at this kind of thing, you've screwed up, as I see it. So from my perspective, it's just not going to be worth it to upgrade the armor. You can do so, but again, just not really recommended. Then air defenses. We have the linebacker right here, or we have the Striker Shorad. You can go with either of these, right? But personally, I would just go for the linebacker. Although, the striker with the SHORAD that can have these double stinger pods can be very, very useful. Especially if you put in these. That said, the linebacker may have a better gun right there, I think. But generally speaking, you would want some good guns, some good missiles right there. So I would probably go with the SHORAD version. Just 2 of them would be enough. Air defense is the kind of thing that, basically everyone has to contribute to. So that's one aspect. Then we have, and generally people will, like, they'll have air defense systems. This brings me to the Patriot. Pack 3s, Pack 3 SMEs, Pack 2s. Is there really a difference? Well, all of them, like, they have different kind of layouts over here in terms of what they can have and different types of missiles. It's a question of cost. Do you want just 2 missiles, 4 missiles, or do you want to be a bit freaking ridiculous with 12 freaking missiles or 16 missiles if you want to, right? So those are the kind of choices you have there. Personally, I think the Pack 2 is pretty good enough, and just going with 2 of them, going to get the job done, not going to be a problem. Okay, so that's kind of your air defense capability, but then we got to talk about trucks. So you will want some trucks. And there's different kinds over here, so I would get some HMTTs trucks. They can carry a good amount of supplies. They're obviously not the fastest, so you might want you may want a vehicle in that respect. Although they're pretty fast. Actually, I think they're the fastest ones over here. So I might be wrong on that. But yeah, you would want all kinds of different vehicles. Smaller ones, bigger ones, that kind of stuff, right? Okay. There's still a lot of points left, so you can, just maximize the number of these, but we can cut down on it later. I'm actually more worried about the total. Okay. We go for Iron Thunder Paladins. Armor is not going to matter on artillery, the gun will. So you get 3 of these Iron Thunder artillery pieces. That's a really good amount of artillery power right there. And then we have a choice between HIMARS or M270s. Now, here's what you need to know about HIMARS. It's basically this with just 1 pod. So instead of having 2 pods, as you can see over here, it only has 1. Use ballistic missiles with high explosive. They're the most expensive, but you have a great combination over here of supply capability, even if it's on the ground. You have good air defense. You have tube artillery, and you have MLRS. You could cut down on some of these vehicles, but you would actually want to ensure you're not going too crazy in terms of your numbers, because air support is one of the things you're going to want to invest in. You're not going to have air-to-ground support, so that's one of the downsides, like lack of helicopters, lack of air-to-ground support. But over here, you do have different options with the F-16 Viper. I kind of wish I could remove these. Like, you can go with fuel tanks, you can go with different kinds of options right here, but, from my personal perspective, I would just rather remove everything here. But if you're gonna go with anything, right, you can go with JDAMs, or you can go with smart missiles. The primary thing you're gonna want with these F-16s is air superiority. So you might have a lot of air defense, but having a jet dedicated to that role is going to be a pretty damn important thing. So what would I get? I would get AIM 120s. More AIM 120s, an ECM pod, designation pod, that's gonna be up to you personally. But yeah, I would just go full on ahead right here, get 2 of these. You can't afford 3 unless you drop some of these. So you could drop some of these missiles and, go for fuel tanks and maybe afford 3 of them. Or you can just go with 2 jets, and afford there. Okay, so we need to cut down on certain things right here because we're over the cap. So I would just remove some of the trucks right here. Actually, remove 2 of these and go with still a bit, just a bit, right there over the edge of points. Just remove the designation pods and maybe that's enough. Yep, that would be enough right there to ensure we have enough. Yeah, you're gonna need someone else to designate for you right there, so that might be a problem. Or you could just keep them because they do have a decent number of missiles right here, so you're looking at quite a few missiles on this wing. So you might just want to keep them in the battle space for longer periods of time. You're not going to dominate in terms of air support, bear that in mind. But you are going to be able to control, if you will, control the skies to an extent or another. But yeah, without, we could probably put a designation pod and just go with the cheapest option over here. Or we could cut down on one of these trucks. That is gonna make you rely on others. But if you want the smart bombs, this is just nitpicking, if you will, on the situation. But yeah, that's your deck. That's America's Armor Fist. Less about, Abrams. Like, even if you want full, like, you could get a good amount of Abrams, but the problem is it's just not worth it. Like, you could, the only way you can get a lot of Abrams is if you remove this, the V3s, the V2s, the Striker at the EGM, and you go full on for M1A2s or SEPs, right? And even then, you're not going to go above 10, right? You're not going to have more than 10 Abrams, as opposed to having 6 Abrams, because it's just a points question, right? You only have 2,500 points. So even if you were to mass these with their default configuration, you're not going to have more than 10 of these, as opposed to having 6 of these that are way better. Way better. It's night and freaking day difference between what the V2s and V3s with trophy have over the other ones. Like survivability, combat usefulness, like pretty much anything that gets in this thing's way, like unit on unit, this is gonna kill any other ground unit that they encounter. There's pretty much nothing on the ground that can defeat an M1A2 V3, right? Or V2. Even an Armata, right? That's a different discussion, right? An Armata is probably the only thing, but it's kind of an even match in that situation. I'd probably put my money on the Abrams for different reasons. But yeah, that is my perspective about making an armor deck for the United States in Broken Arrow. Christine, signing out.